understand. So in light of the ongoing crisis, opioid crisis that is facing America right now, I felt like one of the interviews that I needed to do was to have a sit down with someone who would understand what it's like as far as the opioid crisis is concerned. So today I'm joined by Don Goad, and he is the facility director for Synacor Foundation, which is a rehab, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that. I'll have him go ahead and introduce himself and where he works.
Okay, like you said, Don Goad. I'm a licensed chemical dependency counselor. I've worked at Synacor for several years, and I'm the director there. It's a long-term substance abuse, peer-driven community, therapeutic community.
Okay.
And, Synacor has an entire continuum of care, everything from medical detox, adolescent care, short stays, and prevention.
Okay.
So the facility that I'm director over is the long-term stay. It's the 2-year treatment facility.
Okay. All right. And so I just kind of wanted him to introduce himself so that you would know that the discussion that we're about to have, that he does have the qualifications and the credibility to discuss the topic that we're going to talk about today. So before we get deep into the overall opioid crisis, let's talk about you a little bit, your personal life. Kind of what brought you to where you are today.
I started in the field after a long struggle with addiction myself.
Okay.
I graduated from high school in 1985, and after that it was kind of a downward spiral into addiction for me with methamphetamines. My addiction got so strong that I began to sell drugs, manufacture meth, and that continued on in just a cycle for about 20 years.
Okay. Let's go back a little to, because I've always heard that there is a reason why someone starts doing drugs in the first place. Was it just recreational, or was it something else?
But it started as recreational. It was just kind of a weekend party thing. It started off, and like many other things, just like smoking cigarettes, if you continue to smoke them, you're going to end up a smoker.
Okay.
And Saturday and Sunday turned into Monday, Tuesday, every single day.
Okay.
And that's how it started and that's how it starts for most folks.
Okay. All right. So take me into, when did you first realize that you were an addict, and how did you deal with all of that?
Oh, it was deep into my addiction before I could ever before I admitted that I actually had a problem with it.
Okay.
From 18 years old, I finally got clean at 36. And the bottom line is I didn't get clean until I admitted I had a problem. And so you're talking about 36 years old.
Yeah. So 18 years of struggling with it. What were some of those dark times in those 18 years?
Oh, Lord. The disappointment that it brings on your family, and the poor health, and just you end up in places that you otherwise wouldn't have been. You hear the horror stories about people that they came from a bad background and so forth, and it was just natural for them to transition into that. It was not like that for me. I don't have any horror stories to tell in my past. I came from a good family. My sister's a school teacher. I wanted to be a musician, and I started hanging out with the other musicians, and it was just like when in Rome. You kind of do as the other people around you. It's a big follower. It's a big deal for followers.
What was the realization that caused you to say that, you know what, this is it, I'm an addict? What rock bottom did you really have to hit?
I was incarcerated.
Okay.
And I was eventually arrested for manufacturing and distribution of methamphetamines. I had a good enough attorney that I got the charges reduced to just possession, but that started just a continuous cycle of incarceration for me, because I could never get off probation. I never would make it that far. And so I ended up going through a therapeutic community after violating my probation multiple times. Dallas County Court System sent me through a therapeutic community that saved my life. And that's where I became a believer in what I do, and it kind of relates back to Cynical and why I believe in that form of treatment.
Okay. All right. So, having or still being an addict, someone who's, I guess, always going to be in recovery, right?
Sure.
What are some steps? First of all, what is addiction in your opinion? What is addiction?
Well, there are two different schools of thought.
Okay.
There are opposing views on what addiction is. Some people believe in the disease concept, which says this is a neurological dysfunction, a miswiring that causes people to move towards compulsive behaviors and such as substance abuse and other activities. There are other people that oppose that view, and they say it's not a disease at all because there's an addiction. There's no infectious agent like there is in tuberculosis. There's no pathological or biological process like there is in diabetes, and there's no degenerative condition such as Alzheimer's.
Okay.
But one thing that everybody agrees on is if you don't receive treatment for it, it is fatal.
Okay. All right. So, any other personal experiences that you have with opioids? I think you had mentioned your mom.
Sure. It doesn't just touch the people that are using drugs to get high. My mother passed away from an opioid overdose in 2011. She was recovering from a back surgery and knee replacement, and she was struggling with pain management, and she was prescribed opioid painkillers. And unfortunately, she took to more than she could handle in her age, and we found her passed in bed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the opioid crisis in America now. How do you think we've gotten here?
I think there was a shift towards 2005. I was right in the middle of the end of my drug dealing escapades, and the methamphetamine crisis was coming to an end. There was federal regulations on pseudoephedrine that made it almost impossible to produce methamphetamines in the homegrown fashion that we were used to making money from. And at that point, I saw a shift back to the opioid crisis. We saw a shift back to heroin. And since then, since 1999, there's been the use of the number of deaths by prescription opioids and heroin use has quadrupled. 1,000 people a day now are going into emergency rooms because of opioid overdoses. Hydrocodone, oxycodone, these are the two deadliest forms of opioid. They're more deadly than heroin.
And so the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration said that in 2016, basically almost half of the deaths were because of prescription opioids. So for the person who doesn't really understand, why is your doctor or why is whoever prescribing? The people will be struggling with that to try to understand that. Yeah.
And I think they don't understand the severity of it because my understanding is there's about to be a huge shift. There's about to be a change if a lawsuit that Harris County has filed against the pharmaceutical companies is successful. What Harris County is stating is that the medical community was provided false data as far as how dangerous and how addictive these opioid pain medications were, which had a huge spike in the way that they were being handed out. Okay. And so then the state and the counties were left to deal with the crisis while the pharmaceutical companies continue to collect money and continue to increase in sales. So if that lawsuit is successful, I think you're going to see a huge shift. The medical community went by the data they were provided according to...
So essentially you're saying they weren't quite aware of maybe how strong these drugs were and the impact that they could have.
Yes.
Because the study, yeah.
According to the lawsuit of Harris County,
Okay.
they were provided incorrect information on the addictive nature and the danger of these drugs.
Okay. So locking up people who are in drugs is perhaps not the solution.
It's only a temporary solution
Yeah.
for a long-term problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what are the different stages that someone engages in when they are going through the whole rehab process? What are the different stages that someone will engage in?
In our business, that's our goal, is to push people through the stages of change. They start in the pre-contemplation stage,
Okay.
which means I don't know whether I really want to do this or not.
Okay.
And then they move on to the contemplation stage, preparation, action, and maintenance and relapse
Okay.
prevention.
Okay. So take me through those stages slowly again and kind of explain what happens at each stage.
At pre-contemplation, this is probably the most dangerous stage, because they can either make that decision or not. There's not a counselor in the world that's going to convince you that recovery is the thing for you until you make that decision. And it's our job to kind of bump that in the right direction. At contemplation, you're starting to say, well, this might actually be a problem, and there might actually be a solution to it.
Okay.
Action is when you start taking the steps to actually move towards recovery.
Okay.
And relapse, and the maintenance and relapse is when you've been abstinent from the substances and you've got a long-term plan going to stay away from them.
So in the first stage, what is usually the success rate? Just off the top of your head, just coming to terms with the fact that.
Well, I can tell you that.
All right, welcome back to our discussion on opioids and the opioid crisis facing America. Let's talk a little bit, you mentioned it before, the cognitive behavioral therapy and
Sure.
how that works.
And this is one of the things that we practice, one of the methods that we practice at the Center for Long Term. Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on changing core beliefs and redirecting stressors and learning the things that are going to lead you back to substance abuse. Okay. And being able to redirect yourself by changing thoughts and behaviors.
And what are some stressors? Is that like general things? Different people have different stressors?
Yes, everybody's addiction and everybody's stressors are different. For some people, it's relationship issues, money. It can be any number of things. Some people, they hear music that they used to get high around, and it can take them back and make them have that feeling again. Okay. And it's learning how to address that at the time, redirect, and have a better result.
Interesting. So what role then does the environment that someone lives in, how could that impact their recovery?
Well, I think one of the cliches, especially that you learn in a 12-step program, are people, places, and things. You have to learn to avoid the people, places, and things that are of the most danger to you. But for long-term recovery, one of the things that I found at my own personal experiences are dangerous people, places, and things are going to find you wherever you're at.
That's true, yeah.
You're not going to be able to just avoid people that you used to do drugs with. They're going to pull up next to you at the gas station, which that's a personal experience of mine. I had been about 2 months clean when the guy I used to probably get high with more than anybody pulls up next to me at the gas station. So the avoidance of these things is a good start, but it's not going to work long term unless you have some actual change in your behaviors and thoughts.
I'm curious, how did you deal with that when all of a sudden the person,
It was extraordinarily uncomfortable. And every thought that you can possibly think of about using and and my past and everything, it goes through your head when that happens, you know. And the longer I've stayed clean, the more I've been able to step away from that. It doesn't even, you know, it doesn't even affect me in that way anymore. But if people early in their recovery, it takes them right back to that place immediately.
Yeah. So the further you're in your recovery, those stressors might not be as impactful. Perhaps not. Yeah.
Everybody's recovery is different, just like everybody's addiction. I know people that have been in recovery for 30 years that still struggle with it. I can say my own personal experience has been the more that I give back. You know, I wanted to be a licensed chemical dependency counselor because it completed me. You know, I like to give back, and I like to. I just wanted to do something positive, for the same reason that people go to 12-step programs. It's not necessarily what somebody has to give to you; it's what you have to give back. And by the time I go home at the end of the day, I sleep pretty good.
Okay.
You know, I couldn't imagine doing anything else.
Okay. Some people say, well, you know, why don't you just quit? What are they not getting? And people would say, well, if you really want to quit, you should just quit.
Well, it's not that simple once it gets started. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, and it's like asking somebody, why not just quit smoking cigarettes today? You know, it's things like alcohol and heroin are physically addictive, not just psychologically. You know, there's a sickness that comes along with it. You can't function without it once you've grown accustomed to using it on a daily basis.
Okay. So, how can we solve this crisis that we have going in America with opioids? Because prisons are not going to work.
No. As unfortunate as it is to say, I think I've got some pretty good job security in this field. But I don't think any of us want to see it continue to go up like it has. You know, the people are, in general, they're not going to get off of the substances without help. And, you know, organizations like Synacor are there to help when people get ready. I think alternatives to incarceration, which is, you know, about 60% of our people are from the criminal justice system. About 40% are walk-in. But when we are able to increase the scale of help that's provided to people, then I think we'll be able to reduce the issue.
So let's, as we're getting towards the end, let's put a little bit of what are some of the worst cases. I know you can't call names or anything like that, but what are some of the worst stories and experiences of drugs and opioids and all that you've seen in your life? Where
as a former drug dealer, I've seen the most horrible. I mean, there's a certain level that you get to in your addiction, and then when you look back on it, like as I do years later, almost everybody that I loved or liked at that point is either in a jail institution or they're dead. It's literally almost everybody I know is in prison for years and years, continuously going through some form of rehab, or a majority of them. I've lost count of how many of my friends have passed, and I've attended funerals over drug-related deaths.
So let's close by, what would you say to the person who might come across this interview and they're perhaps on drugs or opioids, whatever the case is? What would you say to that person who's, you know?
Sure. Believe that it can be done.
Okay.
There's an army of us out there that have done it, you know, and I think once you believe it can be done, then you can take the steps to make it happen for you. There are no other options. There's not a retirement plan for junkies.
Yeah.
You know, there's not. You're either going to recover or you're going to die from this, and it's a difficult choice to make the first step. It's uncomfortable for folks.
Yeah.
And
to
so-
deal with.
Sure.
And for the families